Hey gang, this week's episode is brought to you by oldschoolshirts.com. Hey, check them out. You like defunct teams and leagues and t-shirt form? Well, you'll find them there, but a whole bunch of other stuff too. Do you remember a radio station of the past or perhaps a mall that you used to go to? All kinds of great cultural and sports memories can be found at the great folks at oldschoolshirts.com. Promo code GOODSEATS for 10% off all of your purchases. And now, here's our show.
Playing right wing on the Bruins' fourth line tonight is Bobby Robbins. At age 32, with no NHL experience to date, he is the very definition of an underdog to make the opening day roster.
Here you go, dude. Right there. Yeah.
But here's what you need to know about Robbins. He works hard, loves playing hockey, will drop the gloves, and absolutely does not care what the odds say about making the team.
Wanna go? Let's go. Hey, attaboy, hey. Let's go, hey. We're gonna get that one here. We're gonna get that one. Yeah. Zah, 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 zah. Right, boys. Yeah. Headbutt here. Oh, boy. You. Shut the up. I one for you, too. Any time. Prove it. Prove it. I'll let you prove it today. Today you get to prove it. I don't give a I'm working harder than you piece of and I'll prove it, too, any time. So shut the up from now on. Unless you ask me to go. Then we'll go. Hey, I got one for you, ladder. I got one for you. You piece of I'm gonna say Joe with a GWG. What do you think of that?
I'd say I better start
Heads up.
In the end, it's a 5-4 win for the Caps. But after a couple of weeks of camp and 2 rounds of cuts, Bobby Robbins is still here and still making his case for being a Boston Bruin.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Thank you, Dennis Leary. Hello, everyone. It's your pal, Tim Hanlon. It's Good Seats Still Available, the curious little podcast, as always, that's focused on what used to be in professional sports. We thank you for finding us, putting us in your earbuds, etc. And man, we are wound up for a stunning conversation this week with the aforementioned, courtesy of that clip from the Boston Bruins series called, I think it's called Mic'd Up, if I'm not mistaken, Behind the B. I think it's Behind the B, right? Where often they would mic up players and all that kind of stuff. That's from 2014. And yes, Dennis Leary on the longtime Bruins fan, Boston guy, narrating the story, the very brief story, at least when it came to playing for the Boston Bruins, of our guest this week, Bobby Robbins. This is a really interesting tale, and I'll get into some of the specifics in a minute. But this is a guy who was shall we call him a lifer in the minor leagues until near the end of his career. It was a good 10 years or so, going up and down in sideways in the various minor leagues of professional hockey, not just in the United States, but also abroad. We'll get into where and all those kinds of things in a second. But for people who grew up in the Boston and or Providence / New England area, Bobby Robbins is a name that is still very fondly remembered. Played for Providence from 2011 through 2014, is in their, whatever they call their Hall of Fame there. Made a huge impression and got the call up in the following season, 2014 through 15, for some preseason action, as well as a couple of cups of coffee, 3 to count in number, for the A team in Boston, the Boston Bruins. And it's really interesting. You look back at some of the clips that featured Bobby Robbins in the past, and even just his very brief period of time with the senior Boston Bruins club. And people remember him from that season, the preseason and the early games and stuff. They wonder, of course, what happened to him. We're going to get into all of that because that's part of the entire story. But it's on the excuse, right? At least on its face for this little show is the fact that his amazing story and pretty raw life series of events, as we'll get into, traverses a who's who, I guess, if you will, of forgotten franchises, especially in the minor leagues. So the teams that no longer exist anymore include places like the AHL Binghamton, Binghamton, New York Senators, the AHL Albany River Rats, if you remember them, the ECHL's Elmira Jackals. We get into all kinds of the Bakersfield Condors of the Eastern ECHL, the 1 year wonder, if you call it that, of the Chicago Express, et cetera, and et cetera. And the recall that Bobby has of those times, those teams, is pretty incredible, especially when you consider the demons that he was fighting all along the way. The book title kind of explains it in a nutshell. It's called Sex, Drugs, Pucks, and Souls, The Secret Life of a Hockey Fighter. It is, as he writes on the cover, a savage memoir, and it is indeed a very raw and real conversation about it. And I highly encourage this book. It's really a gripping read, and it's made it's more intriguing by the fact that Bobby wrote this all himself completely. He during his college years at UMass Lowell was a creative writing major, concentrated on a lot of this stuff, and it is clear that he not only attended class, but he learned and retained quite a bit because he is an excellent writer. And I think you'll get a sense of that too in our conversation as well, as he recounts and unabashedly, without reservation, a lot of the issues and challenges, the sheer depression and drug issues and all that kind of stuff. His fighting days, why he was fighting, why he wasn't fighting, a lot of psychological and mental issues. But at the end of the day, as you'll hear in this discussion, and as we will see in the book if you buy it, a story of redemption. He is definitely on the other side of all of that stuff. A sheer delight to talk to. And who knows what this conversation would have been like back during his playing days. I'm not quite sure he would even be ready to have that type of conversation amidst all of this drama and struggle. But boy, are we happy to have had him a couple of weeks back for this conversation. And we do, again, want to sort of highlight the book, which is, of course, available, as always, with all of our various guests' offerings in media, books in particular, on our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. All you have to do is search up our episode number 356 with Bobby Robbins, and you'll find a convenient link to either the hardcover or paperback version of said book. It is published by Rotterdam Books. Like I said, it is authored completely, no ghostwriting required, by our guest this week, Bobby Robbins. It has a sterling 5.0 review ratings amalgamation on Amazon. And I think once you hear this conversation and understand some of the story behind it, you will understand why it is such a compelling read and a story of equal potence. And let's get right to it, shall we? This is ultimately a wonderful conversation, a delightful gentleman Bobby is. And let's put it this way. It was a long way to get there for him. And let's get into that story, shall we? Please sit back, buckle up, and as always, enjoy. Look, you know that this silly little show has been kind of focused and obsessed with lots of teams and leagues and stuff that are no longer around. And just by that definition alone, you qualify. Congratulations. I wish I could give you a prize. But, you know, as we'll get into in a minute, right, you had an amazing journey through pro hockey. But I think it's lost on a lot of people about what that journey entails. And frankly, a lot of it entails grinding it out in a lot of perhaps maybe more so than any other pro sport. I would say even baseball too, with its vaunted minor leagues and stuff. When did you know that you wanted to be a pro hockey player in the first place? It had to be early in your ideation growing up in Rhinelander, Wisconsin, right?
Yeah, I was born in Rhinelander. That's way up in the north woods of Wisconsin, and I grew up in a little town called Peshtigo, about 45 minutes north of Green Bay. But yeah, I mean, I knew early on as a you know kindergarten through third grade, kind of in that time period when I started playing hockey. I mean, we all said it back then. We all want to play in the NHL and play pro hockey, and that just became my dream and my vision early on. And as I progressed through the ranks, I just kept getting better and better. And I ended up playing junior hockey, and then all of a sudden I'm playing Division I hockey. And by the time I was at that point, I was just so focused in the moment. Like, the Division I grind, you talk about the grind is no joke. I mean, you're in class, you're competing at the highest level in college athletics. So for me, at least, I wasn't even really thinking about the NHL at that point or pro hockey. I was just kind of getting through every day and wanting to make the lineup. And, we're on the ice, we're in the weight room, we're in the classroom, we're eating, we sleep, and then there's the extracurricular, the social life. And so it wasn't really into my junior year. I get into it in my book where one of my teammates really says to me, looks me in the eye, and he told me that if I doubled the amount of goals I scored this year, that I would be in the NHL next year. And that was really my aha moment. And he's a really smart guy. He's a coach at Boston University now, and he saw it. So he saw that in me before I even saw it in myself. And it was that moment, my junior year, where the reality, it wasn't just this thing that I said, it was this thing that I actually started to believe, not just in my head or with my mouth, but in my heart. And that's where it really took off. And I started my serious climb that I was going to only make it to the NHL, and I didn't care about anything else. That became my drive and mission.
I think it's lost on a lot of people who are fans of pro hockey, especially the NHL level, just how much dedication plus effort plus, frankly, a bit of luck too to get through the pyramid that gets you to the NHL. And frankly, lots don't even make it to that level. What's driving you to do that? Is it just the need to have something to focus your energies on? Were you not a good student? Did you just fall into this, or was it natural talent? I mean, what was driving you to pursue hockey as your passion focus?
Well, I think anybody who's ever played hockey knows that it's without a doubt the greatest sport that exists. And maybe I'm a little biased, but I mean, early on,
just a little, but that's okay. It's what we're here.
It's okay, right? I mean, I fell in love with it, just like everyone does. You become a hockey fanatic. You're on sharpened blades of steel, flying around the ice at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and all of a sudden you can check people, and then all of a sudden now you can fight people, and you're scoring goals, and it's just an exciting game. And I fell in love with it, and it just became my life. If I wasn't at practice or if I wasn't on the rink as a kid, I was out in the driveway shooting pucks, and then when it was raining or it was dark out, I would come inside and I'd be stick handling around my living room with a golf ball, and that's just all I did was eat and breathe and drink and sleep and everything hockey. And a lot of people have that passion, but so I had that drive and that passion and the interest in it. But then I also had, just a God-given talent to be successful at it at the different levels. And, by the time I got to serious hockey, which I would say like Division I hockey is the real deal, that's serious hockey. By the time I was there, it was my life. I just said, this is what I am. This is what I do. And, later as a junior and a senior in my collegiate career, I just said, I want this to be my life now. I don't want to do anything else. I couldn't even picture doing anything else. And like you said, there is that pyramid as you keep moving up it, and you get people who fall off and don't make it. And what is that thing that makes that gets somebody to that next level? And if you could pin that down, you'd make $1 million selling that product. But I don't know what it is. But I think for myself and the peers that I've played with in the hockey world who I've seen make it, to the next level and to the next level, they all have this internal drive and motivation that comes from somewhere. And I don't know necessarily where mine came from, but I think a lot of it comes from a desire to prove myself, almost to prove my self-worth. And not only to myself but to the world. And I grew up a person of color in a predominantly really a all white town in northern Wisconsin. And so I always had this mentality that I needed to make something of myself and be successful for my self-worth, and whether that's a healthy thing or not. I think that was something that I always had. I had a chip on my shoulder to prove myself to others and to those who didn't believe in me, but also just to prove it to myself, maybe.
Well, your mom is of Filipino descent, right? As an example of that, right? Would it be fair to say that you had to work harder, at least in your psychology, to stand out more and prove yourself of greater worth versus the largely, perhaps if not fully, lily white world that you were surrounded by up there?
I think so. And we joke about it with my mom. And she came here when she was 19. I mean, she grew up on the island climbing coconut trees in her bare feet, and moved to northern Wisconsin of all places, and was wearing a little skirt and had never seen snow before. And they all arrived, big family, 6 siblings, on a plane in the middle of a snowstorm. So she came, and she's got a drive to her too, and climbed throughout the medical ranks, and had a successful career as a nurse, and just always instilled that hard work in us. And being the second generation Filipino American, I just knew I wanted to make something of myself. And especially later in my career, when I met a amazing girl and got married, then all of a sudden I have a kid. I was looking at the reality of things. I'm like, I need to be successful, and I need to make it. And this is my opportunity that's been laid out in front of me. And that was just my mentality, to literally give it everything I have, and fight for it like my life did depend on it.
Okay, well, we're going to get into some other interesting twists and turns in this, but before we sort of get there, I also think it's lost on a lot of people too, this sort of junior hockey thing, right? Because you had to play, or I guess it's sort of the part of the process, right? This thing called junior hockey, which is sort of not quite pro, but it sort of is, and it's got teams, and you do the traveling thing, and then you went to college for 4 years at a D1 program, a pretty darn good one, and then after that, you're getting drafted to go back, if you will, into the proper minors. Explain to the layman what this junior hockey thing is and commitment. And by the way, it happens to be our first little venture into a team that doesn't exist anymore. Do you remember anything about the Great Falls Americans?
Oh, of course, of course. What an amazing journey that was. I'll get to my to the spot where Great Falls comes into the story, but to answer your initial question is, hockey is a really unique sport in that, most sports, you go from high school, you're 18 years old, and you go to college as a 19-year-old freshman. Well, most hockey players in college, most freshmen are 19, 20, maybe even 21 years old. It's the one sport where you take 2 years off of development. And I don't know why that is. I think the market dictated it, because when you're 18, the hockey's so good and advanced and physical. I think the physicality is a big part of it, where you're not quite a man yet at 18. You need those 2 years to develop. And so this thing exists called junior hockey. And junior hockey is essentially players age 16 to 20. I think there can be a 21. There's some rules on 21-year-olds, but it's 16 through 20. And they're leagues to be scouted and to be developed as a player. So, I went to play junior hockey, like you said, out in Great Falls, Montana, and that was known as a Tier 3 junior league. So in America at that time, there was 3 junior tiers. There was the USHL, the North American Hockey League, and the America West Hockey League. And so that's where I ended up, in the America West Hockey League. And the thing about junior hockey is it's the first time where you can actually fight. So all through youth hockey, there's a lot of rules. You wear a face mask and a cage. When you go play junior hockey, it's almost like this rite of passage as a man, where now you can take off the cage. You have to take off your cage. And back in those days, now everybody wears a visor or a half shield. You see that little plexiglass in front of the player's eyes. Back in my day, it was a statement. Either you weren't going to wear one and you're just going to go your full face exposed, or you were going to wear a visor. And if you didn't wear a visor, it was essentially sending a message that you were putting out a green light that you were available to fight. So that was the message to be sent. And everybody decides, like, oh, I'm going to go to my first tryout. Do I wear a visor or do I not? And I knew I was going to fight. I knew I was tough, and I knew that I was willing to do it. So there's this weird mystique about junior hockey, where it's the first time where you can actually fight. And for people who don't know, for the layman in the hockey world or in the sports world, hockey is the one sport out of any sports where you can just stop and take off your gloves. Back in those days, we would take off our helmets too, and you just fight bare knuckle until the fight's over, or until the refs break it up, or until somebody loses and hits the ice. And it exists for many reasons that which we can get into, but junior hockey is the first time that you experience that. And man, for me, I was terrified to do it, but I was a big, strong kid, and I boxed, and I loved hitting the heavy bag and the speed bag, and maybe I had a lot of pent up aggression inside of me as well. But I learned early on that I could fight, and I could fight pretty well. But my hockey skills weren't quite at that highest level. So I had to start out in the third tier down, the America West Hockey League. So as a 18-year-old young man, I just graduated from high school, and I made the drive out to Montana, just looking up at the mountains. The first time I'd ever seen the mountains on the horizon, and that just started my life as a man and my life as a hockey player, doing it for real. And like you said, it is a lot like pro hockey. The style is a lot like more is very pro hockey like, and there's the fighting, and but so everybody's playing in those leagues to try and get scouted by pro hockey, by the NHL, but mostly by Division I colleges. So you go play 1 or 2 years a junior, and then you develop physically, and you kind of learn the hockey. You develop as a hockey player, and then you're good enough to finally go and play Division I hockey.
All right, so many questions, but so do you do you still technically live at home back in Wisconsin, and then you do this junior hockey thing for a period of time? I don't know how long the season is, or are you kind of full time? Or are they paying you, or probably stipend and stuff, and living hand to mouth? Do they put you up? How do you survive, if you will, in that sort of probably pretty scary first time on your own, semi type professional playing for attention and maybe some bucks along the way?
Yeah, well, how it works in America, Canada is a little different, but in America, you don't get paid, but every player is housed by a housing family. They're called billets. So you get a billet family. So essentially, I drive out to Montana. I pull up to the rink. I meet my team. A billet family comes in and introduces themselves, and you're going to live with them now for the hockey season, which is maybe 7 or 8 months. So you go and live with these families. And then the rule is you either have to have a part-time job or you have to be going to school part-time. So a lot of people will go to the local community college or wherever, or online, and take college classes. And I think that's a pretty smart move for a lot of guys. Then you can get the general eds out of the way, so that when you go to your Division I school or your college, then you don't have to take a full workload of classes. Kind of, you can focus more on the hockey now that you've got the gen eds out of the way. I wasn't that smart, so I decided to just work. And my first year, I worked at Dick's RV Park. Shout out to Dick, he was the man out there. So we'd ride around in an ATV and clean up the RV park, and whatever we needed to do. We just worked there for 4 hours, have lunch, then go to practice. And the next year, I was a bank teller for a few months at one of the local credit unions, and then I got hooked up with the local school, and they hired me as a paraeducator, and I would work with this guy downtown, Alex Brown. Shout out. He was a student there who just needed a little extra attention. So my job was, for 4 hours in the morning, I would just follow him around and help him get to his classes and help him with his homework. And then I would go to practice, and then we'd play games on the weekend. And so it was a pretty interesting, unique way of life as a young man. I know in Canada it's a little different. Some of them, they do get paid on some different levels, and they lose their eligibility for the NCAA. But in America, it was all, you had to work part-time or you had to go to school part-time. And, your billets take care of you, and, they feed you well. They get a stipend from the team. I don't know how much it is, probably a few $100s a month, but they pay you, they feed you, and they let you sleep there, and they pretty much just adopt you into their family for about 8 months.
Right. But this is also your first time being on your own, so to speak. And obviously this continues with the Tri-City Storm in the huge metropolis of Kearney, Hastings, and Grand Island, Nebraska the next year. How are you handling semi-independence? Because that sounds like a lot of responsibility and, frankly, a lot of trust on the shoulders of a host family and others who are trying to help support you in your journey. Were you the docile choir boy in that regard, or was it kind of fun being by yourself and on your own for the first time, and maybe a little crossing the lines a little bit?
I would never cross the line, Tim. You know that about me.
Of course not.
No, I mean, I actually, before my junior hockey, I actually left when I was 15 years old. So this is another common thing that players will do. Basically, the hockey ladder is an interesting climb. You don't want to be a big fish in a small pond. And where I was up here in northern Wisconsin, that was just the reality. And in order to develop, you want to be a small fish in a big pond so that you can grow into that big fish and then make the jump to the next pond. And that's pretty much the hockey ladder. That's how you climb it. So when I was 15, I left school and went to prep school, or left my hometown and went to prep school at Culver Military Academy down in Indiana. They're known as a great hockey development school. And so I was used to being on my own, and I was always very independent. But I was definitely reckless and got in some trouble with just living the life of partying and drugs and alcohol and girls, and didn't really have I almost like had this dichotomy about me. I had a good head on my shoulders. I was a leader. Like I don't think I was putting on a mask. Like I really did care, but I also had a temptation and I fell to temptation very easily. So I always felt there was like this pull, was I supposed to be this really like stand up guy, leader on a team, or was I going to be the party guy? And that seemed to be the dynamic throughout much of my hockey career, just figuring out what my identity was and who I was.
Well,
But
you also, though, you acquired quite the taste for the enforcer role too, right? You quickly, I think, kind of, it looks just from the stats alone, right? It looks like you acquired quite an expertise, shall we say, in being, shall we say, slightly aggressive and on for your team and your teammates. Uh, how does UMass Lowell coaching and all that stuff get you? I mean, clearly you had a bunch of stats in your junior hockey to attract such a program like that. But where did you sort of acquire this taste? Was it in the juniors, or how do you become sort of that type of player? Because I got to think that not everybody, number one, is cut out for that kind of role, and number two, it's definitely a role playing kind of thing, right? Where it's not, you can maybe. You don't need to be a fully skilled player to sort of focus on that particular part of the game, right?
yeah, I mean, the thing about fighting in hockey is I don't think anybody ever signs up to become a hockey fighter. We all want to go out there and score goals and be Wayne Gretzky. But, for a guy like me and a lot of these other guys, you almost get pigeonholed into this role as the quote unquote goon or enforcer. And my first tryout, I always played hard, passionate hockey. I always wanted to have my heart on my sleeve and give it everything I had. And there was only one speed for me. I just went 100 miles an hour. I was trying to score goals, and I was also trying to put you through the glass. Like I loved hitting people. So once you get out of youth hockey, you can hit and there's no repercussions. But once you reach junior hockey, that's called quote unquote running around. If I'm a guy who's running around out there on the ice, somebody's going to come up and challenge me and say, there's a price to pay for playing like that. And so my first tryout, I knew that I was going to have to fight, and I had been given some advice like, hey, fight early on to get noticed and then just show that you're a really good hockey player. That seems to be a good tactic. You want to do anything to make this team. You're at this tryout with 80 kids. 80 young men. How are you going to stand out and be, one of the 5 who gets the call who are not on the team yet? And so at my first tryout, I was just running around and playing hard hockey, and I got challenged. And I said no at first, but then I just said, all right, I'm going to do it. And it's kind of a funny scene in the book I get into, where I get challenged by one of the veterans on the team, the Springfield Junior Blues down in Illinois. And I finally say, all right, I'm going to do it. I drop my gloves. And then the big tough guy of the camp, he pushes the other guy aside and says, no, you're going to fight me instead. So I must have been really aggravating some people out there by the way I was playing. And that's usually a good indication that you're playing good hockey, a good hard-nosed brand of hockey. And that's what coaches notice. But I had 2 of the veterans out there. They both had their gloves off and they were looking to fight me. And I stepped forward and I ended up getting in my first hockey fight. and really, really beat this guy up, blew up his nose and dropped him. And so right away I was like, wow, I can do this, and then all of a sudden you get respect from people. It's a noble thing. Your teammates are thanking you and everybody's giving you a lot of accolades. And then all of a sudden you get in your next fight and you do well. And so that's kind of what happened to me. I was just a tough kid, and I used to spend a lot of time hitting the speed bag, and I could throw pretty fast punches. And and it's kind of like, what are you going to say no when you got a reputation already and the guy comes up and asks you? So it's a bit of a double-edged sword where you're tough, but a lot of guys just get kind of stuck into that role. So I felt that in junior, I became that player, but I was also a guy who could play hockey and put goals in the net. And so I had these two things going. I was tough and rugged. I could fight, but I could also score goals and play a pretty good brand of hockey. And that's what got me to UMass Lowell. It wasn't the fighting, because there's no fighting in college, which is kind of weird. You fight in junior and then you go to college and there's no fighting. So that's where in college, I just fell in love with being a hard-nosed hockey player, and really forgot about the aspect of fighting and forgot about the fear element of it, which we can get into. The fear is just, it's an all-consuming fear that every hockey player feels when they're going to have to fight somebody. You don't want to lose in front of thousands of fans, and you don't want to get hurt, and there's all the what ifs. So I played 4 years at UMass Lowell and then turned pro, and then that's when the reality hit. I was like, oh no, Tim, this fighting thing exists now. So I had to make that decision whether I was going to try and be that player or not. And it took me a few years to really figure it out, because my first really 4 years professional, I didn't really fight for real. And it wasn't until after my fourth year where I really committed to it and realized that that's what I was, and that was my destiny. And that's the player that I had to be in order to make it.
All right, tell me about those first minor league years after post college, right? So the Binghamton Senators, we're talking AHL. You had a year or a couple of an interesting year in 2007, 2008, where you were with a bunch of different teams, mostly Elmira up in upstate New York, but a couple of other cups of coffee, literally one game in a couple of different places like Syracuse and Albany. Tell us what's going on in those first few years. First of all, how do you get drafted? By whom? How do you find yourself in Binghamton? And how goes the adjustment from now with the fighting thing there in front of you? You mentioned fear. It seems like it's probably one part teammates, one part fans, one part hockey culture, one part trying to make your mark and improve and get noticed. Maybe even psychologically otherwise too.
Yeah, I mean, that jump from college to pro hockey is a pretty big one. That's where you see a lot of guys fall off that pyramid, where they don't make that jump to the next level. But for me, I actually was not drafted. So the draft year for a hockey player, you only have one draft year. That's when between your 18 and 19-year-old years. In junior hockey is when you can get drafted. If you don't get drafted, you're called in a free agent, so an undrafted free agent. So there's some people say that's good, some people say it's bad. If you really have a good college career and you're undrafted, then it opens you up to every team, and then you can get like a bidding war going. And that's kind of what happened to me. I had a breakthrough senior year at UMass Lowell. I was the captain and ended up being the leading scorer, and just had this Cinderella season after that glimpse I talked about my junior year, when my buddy Kim Brembold said to me, you can be in the NHL. That's when I really dedicated myself. And then I ended up having this breakthrough senior year, and I had a handful of teams interested in me, and it ended up being the Ottawa Senators of the NHL, where they'd been scouting me all year, and they kind of picked me up and said, hey, we want you to go to Binghamton in the American Hockey League, which is the AAA level, their farm team. And how that works, for most of the time, for a guy like me, for a free agent who's undrafted, you sign something called an ATO, which is called an amateur tryout. It's a 25-game contract. I think I signed for 50 grand, and they pay you on a per diem basis. So I was there for 16 games, like 5 weeks. So they just pay you however much that is, a few $100 per day, for the length of your contract, but they can also release you at any time. It's an amateur tryout. So they're saying, hey, come show your stuff. So I actually left school early. Right after my senior season ended, we got beat by the Maine Black Bears in playoffs. and I knew I was going to go. I had had a breakthrough senior year, so I just waited around. There's a cool scene in the book where everybody's, it's the end of the year, everybody's really tying one on and partying this big college, keg party, and I'm just sitting there drinking a gallon of water, knowing that I'm leaving in the morning, and I don't know where I'm going, but some team's going to call me, and I finally get that call, and it's the Senators, and they tell me to report to Binghamton. So you all of a sudden you're this big time college hockey player, and now you're all of a sudden a little tiny minnow in this big pond of these legit professionals, and these are men. These are real rugged men. And so I just walked into that locker room and um, was scared. Really I knew the way I had to play, but I was really scared to fight. And I ended up fighting one guy and really beat him up and showed that I was a tough guy, but I didn't fight like I wasn't becoming a quote unquote fighter. I wanted to show that I was a player, that I could score goals and be a player. And I played 16 games and showed my stuff enough where I ended up signing an NHL deal. Ottawa offered me a 1-year NHL contract, with a signing bonus and everything. And now all of a sudden I'm a man and I'm a pro hockey player and they're paying me money. And so I go up to NHL training camp in Ottawa after a summer of training. And really, that's where I saw inside of myself, Tim. I saw that I was actually, if I really put the mirror up and looked deep inside, I was a coward and I was afraid to fight. And there was a lot of pressure. Like you said, there's pressure from your teammates, from coaches. I had, literally one of the staff members tell me who to fight in an exhibition game against the Toronto Maple Leafs. He came up to me and says, "Hey, are you going to fight, so and so?" And I was in my head, I'm like, I'm not fighting, and I'm not doing that. Um, I think I was just scared. I mean, looking back on it, I would feel like an idiot where I should have been willing to do anything to make my dream come true, but I didn't, and I didn't make the team, and I ended up playing that first year in the American League, 80 games. I played every game, fought maybe 6 times, but never really became that role as the fighter. And for me, a guy like me with the skill level that I brought, with my physicality, that had to be something that I needed to bring to the table. And they even told me, a scout in my exit meeting with all the management, they said, if you want to be a guy who plays in the NHL or the AHL, you're going to have to be a guy who fights 20, 25 times a year. And I just didn't see it in me. And I really gave up my dream right there. And I couldn't get a contract anywhere in the AHL or the NHL for my second year pro, and I had to start in the East Coast Hockey League, which is like AA, and that's where I was for the Elmira Jackals. And so while I was there, I was just having this wrestling back and forth of, do I become a fighter? Do I not? And I saw all these rugged old fighters on our team who are they look so old and broken down, and I gave up, and I just really covered up all my fear with drugs and alcohol and the party. And I had a few call ups to the AHL, but never stuck. And that's really the moment where I gave up on my NHL dream. And then that next year, I jumped ship, as they say, and went over the pond to go play in Europe, where there is no fighting and it's safe, and it's just a good time. You play less games and you don't have to worry about fighting. But that's not the end of the story.
No. But give me a sense though. Besides that sort of dynamic, give me a sense though of what you're seeing in this AHL and the ECHL and stuff. I mean, you're in towns like Elmira and Rochester and Binghamton, and a cup of coffee with Syracuse. You're getting a shot at Albany for a game. I mean, you're also mentioning a bunch of different players who are there for many years, never make the show. And also, a bunch of probably young, hungry rookies and stuff. There are people coming up and going down, I guess. And you're probably caught and stuck in the middle, not knowing what the hell to do. How do I either get out of this or use this to get to the next level? Or maybe I'm not cut out for it.
I mean, I love that you cover this aspect of pro sports, especially in hockey, the minor leagues. I mean, you always hear about the minors and this and that and these cool towns with these cool mascots, but within it, there's so many characters, and there's a culture, and especially up in upstate New York, I literally played for every minor league team in New York.
It seems
that
like
year. I think literally every team, because I got Elmira on there. That was the one AA team. But yeah, there's just there's an interesting dynamic where there's the old bucks on the team. They're the veterans, they're called. And I think a veteran is somebody who's played maybe 250 games professionally. And so a team can only carry a certain number of veterans, and it changes every year when there's, the new bargaining agreements, but I think it's like 6. So you get like these 6 old guys on the team. They might be in their 30s, and or late 30s, some of them, and they've just been through it, and they're rugged men, and they're pros. Like they have honed their craft. They never Maybe they played some games in the NHL, maybe some didn't, but at that level, even at the AA level in the East Coast Hockey League, you get these guys who are pros, and you just can tell like everything about them. You watch them, and I got there and I was watching these guys stretch, and I'm watching what they do before games, and it was almost like entering the movie Slapshot, and seeing all these guys, these characters, and then these towns, these small towns, and the fan base of these supporters. They just are they they love their team, and they bleed their team, the colors of their team, and it's a really cool dynamic. And like you said, I played everywhere and got to experience a lot of that. And but there's something special about it. And then you do have the young buck rookies coming up, and you pretty much see every type of person. You see like the kind of the blue chip stud rookie who's not willing to work as hard as he needs to, and he just doesn't make it. And then you get the guy who's not quite as good, but he has that work ethic, and everybody's compete your brothers, your teammates. You go to war together, you go out to the bar and you party after the game together. Like each other, you're on a soul level. But at the same time, you're in a competition with these guys. Like, you want to be the guy who gets the call up instead of this guy next to you, and when I was in Providence in the American Hockey League, there was a young buck, Tyler Randall, who was 10 years younger than me and real tough. And I was always like, oh, I hope I don't have to fight this guy, because he always worried me a little bit. He had a crazy look in his eye. And, the management literally told him, at this point in my career, I was one of those good pro veterans. And that was his instructions. And my instructions were, hey, Randy's just going to follow you around and do what you do. Just take them under your wing, show them what you do, and develop them. And so I took that role seriously. I was a leader on that team, but at the same time, I wanted to make the Boston Bruins. And I'm looking at this guy, and I'm like, I know this guy wants to take my spot. So there's just that weird dynamic of your brothers, a team together, but at the same time, you're competing. And yeah, it's just it's a high stress, but also a high reward environment, and it's just it's a powerful thing to experience.
Yeah, and probably not unique to hockey either, but it's a dynamic that people kind of don't really get. You sort of like you're kind of two minds, sometimes maybe even three minds, because you're looking out for yourself and looking out for number one, but you're also, trying to be a good teammate and all that, and you don't know what they're looking for at that particular moment, maybe for that cup of coffee call, for that next level. All right, tell me what happens though. So you're down a notch in Elmira, you're getting a couple of looks again up at the AHL with Rochester and Syracuse and Albany. But then, tell me what really happens. Like what forces somebody to dramatically say, I'm going to get out of here and go to Belfast of all places to continue my career? Because it sounded like you were thinking about maybe just hanging it up at that point too. What else is going on in your life besides this? Or is this just ultimately like, I don't know what's next for me and I don't see much of a future here?
Yeah. See, I never had that hindsight back then. I was just living day to day. I wasn't even looking to my future. I was just kind of just living it and taking it as it came. And
living large in Elmira, eh?
That's it. That's right. And if I just, we were partying, chasing girls, playing hockey, and
I'm sure more than a few meals were paid for you too.
Yeah. You're looked at as a celebrity there. Opening night, we dressed in tuxedos and took limousines to the game in beautiful Elmira, New York. The management, Robbie Nichols, he's a legend, hockey legend. He owned that team there, and they just treated the players right. And they put you up in the East Coast Hockey League. They actually put you up in housing, so you don't have to pay for housing, which is pretty nice. And then the American League, it changes where you have to find your own place. But yeah, just showing up in the limo, and it's easy to get comfortable in a place like that. When in the big picture of that NHL dream, for me, it just disappeared. And I was struggling with a lot of internal battles and demons with drugs and alcohol and addiction. And, that's the year where I started to get deeper into painkiller addiction. And the fear of fighting and just giving up. And, I get into it in my book. One of the big moments for me was we actually got in a bus crash. We were driving back from Cincinnati, in a big snowstorm, and we crashed our bus in the middle of this scary snowstorm, and our bus driver was pinned, and it was chaos. And a few of the guys got injured, like, tore their knees up and broke their ankles. It wasn't like, it could have been much, much worse, but it was enough to really scare me. And I separated my shoulder, and I ended up being the guy helping this bus driver as his whole lower body was crushed in the front of the bus. And these helicopters came, and they had to bring him out, or tear him out of there with the jaws of life. And it was, for me, it was a really traumatic moment. And looking back on it now, and I was able to, writing my memoir, I was able to really look back on memories and release certain things. And I pinpointed that. I didn't see it at the time, but that is a place where I pinpointed where I did give up. And that's where I started, looking at who I was. Am I a spiritual being? Am I just meat and potatoes? Like, am I just a sack of bones? What am I? So I had all these questions because I almost died. I was like, I could have died in that bus crash. And I started asking a lot of big questions about life and who I really am after seeing that bus driver. And for me, it just scared me enough where I pretty much became a functioning drug addict. Really just drinking every night and everything else, and pills. And that's where I gave up, was that moment. I said, I don't want to do this anymore. And so, after that season, I just kind of said I was done. And at that point, I wasn't really looking at my future, and it pretty much just whichever way the wind is blowing, I'm going. And a buddy of mine asked me if I'd ever heard of the Belfast Giants. And I had never heard of them or had heard of that league in the UK before, but I just wanted to get out of there and do something different. And a big part of that was the fear of fighting. I didn't want to have that pressure on me anymore. It was really eating me up, and it got to the point where I couldn't handle it mentally anymore. And so I just essentially quit and went to go, that's where the old dogs go off to die, as you cross the pond, you go play in Europe, and you can have a good career and make good money, and life's pretty good in Europe. And, you play for 10 more years, and the games are a little less physical. And so that was my plan. I was just going to go live it up and go have a good time in Europe, and give up on that NHL dream, and finally release that pressure from me it's just always there. Like, oh, I got to make it. I finally just released it and said, forget it. I'm just going to go and have fun.
All right, what's this? Oldschoolshirts.com. Fantastic. You've heard me talk on and on and on about the great folks and the great wares at oldschoolshirts.com. Like the name implies, it's old school and it's shirts, and they put them together, into what they call oldschoolshirts.com. It's like the name implies, but of course we love them primarily for their sports wear. You name the league of the past, you name the team of the past, the chances are huge that they're going to have more than one shirt and different color schemes for things that you may remember from the United Football League or the Major Indoor Soccer League or various flavors of the original XFLs, plural, or the Federal League perhaps, or maybe World Team Tennis, or maybe it was the North American Soccer League, and on and on and on. But hey, it's not just sports. It's also great cultural touchstones and memories from the past. How about the officially licensed Evel Knievel connection? How about collection? Yeah, that's what he's trying to say. Various colleges. How about dead malls of the past? Ice cream parlors, maybe even radio stations that you might remember. Hey, even there's a latest edition of the now old, Aloha Stadium commemorative shirt. All that kind of stuff and more. You will find at least a handful of shirts that you will just transport you back into your past, and you will amaze and impress your friends at the same time. It's oldschoolshirts.com, and we got a promo code for you, of course. Let's save you some dough while you go there, and its promo code is Good Seats. Good Seats, that's the promo code at oldschoolshirts.com. Promo code Good Seats for 10% off all of your purchases. Hey, P.F. Wilson and your friends at oldschoolshirts.com, thank you for your sponsorship of the show. And now, back to our conversation. who else is in your life at this point, right? Number one, to even suggest that idea. Number two, who's looking out for you, if anybody, and maybe sees your descent into addiction and other psychological issues, and frankly, how much of it is you recognizing it yourself, or are you not capable of that at that point?
I don't think I'm capable of it at that point. I saw it maybe a year or two later. Looking in the mirror, I saw it. But at that point, like I said, I was just living in that moment. I didn't have anyone, so I was single, and it was like, maybe you got a girlfriend this month and another one the next month, and they're partying too. So you're not really going in depth and looking at the reality of things. And the hockey life is so fast paced. It's like, and you got a game tonight, then you got a game tomorrow, then you got a day off, you sleep, you go to a party, you wake up, you shake it off, you got another game, and
Probably
it's just
injuries too that are creeping up on you as well.
yeah. I mean, you go through injuries and
Staying
all the
healthy, food wise too. Probably not eating the best either. All that kind of stuff.
yeah. I mean, I looking back on it in hindsight, I'm like, man, I was an idiot. Why didn't I take it more seriously? But you get wrapped in that culture, and I didn't. And luckily I got a second chance to do it all over again when I came back to North America with a whole new mindset. And that's when I became a machine. And I was tracking my macros of what I'm eating. I wouldn't even let sugar in my body. I was dialed in with my sleep, with my recovery, with everything. And so I had to become, on one part of my career, I was like this madman on, this party madman. But on the other side of my career, I became this madman of health and fitness and goal setting and just of excellence. And so I guess I'm a man of extremes, but it took me a while to get there. But at this point in the story where I gave up, there's really nobody looking out for me, and it's everybody else is just living it too. And it's easy to go down into a descent because it's like you don't stick out like a sore thumb if you're a functioning drug addict or an alcoholic in the hockey world. Like it's pretty much par for the course in a lot of these lower levels.
But wherever you go, there you are, right? So all
Right.
this stuff is still following you in Great Britain and later in Slovenia too, right? What is this getting any better as the story unfolds? And how are you getting there in the first place? I'm assuming you had an agent of some sort, or is this just something you're doing on your own to get a look and get connected over there?
Nope. So I had an agent after my first and second year pro, and then at that point I just fired him and I said, I'm just going. I'm doing this on my own. I had a buddy who had the connection over there, and I worked out the contract by myself, and
And nobody
just
was trying to talk you out of it, or were they?
yeah, I think my agent was, but I just kind of gave him the cold shoulder and said, thanks, but no thanks. This is what I'm doing. My parents, they didn't really know the hockey world. Seems like an exciting adventure, and it was amazing to go play over there. But I told them I don't want to fight, and there's too much pressure here to fight. So I'm gonna go do something that I want to do and just want to have fun playing hockey again. Because I always had fun playing, but there was a big element of it that wasn't fun for me,
No,
and that was
no
that
joy
pressure.
per se, right?
Right. And no joy. And I was finding joy in different areas other than, hockey success. It was joy in the bottle or joy in any other distraction other than the reality that I was, on this quest to make it to the NHL, because at that point it sure didn't look like it.
So, all right. So, explain to me your 2 years in Europe and the journey back to the United States, to Bakersfield, the ECHL again, of all places.
Yeah.
What is there a discovery along the way during this time, or did it? You're mentioning sort of this dichotomy between your sort of selves, so to speak. Your rehab, so to speak, personally isn't. When is this happening?
Yeah, so I'm in Belfast, and Belfast is I don't know if you know this about the Irish, but they can stereotypically they can drink pretty heavily.
As an
So
Irish descent, I've heard that. Yeah.
so I mean, Belfast is the coolest place ever. This is my favorite place I ever played, and it's a big party city. It's young and vibrant, and the hockey team is the biggest sports team in town. So you're a legend there, and a lot of us, I certainly did, just lived it up, and I was just living in that moment, and had a really successful year. Was a real um, key player on the team. Got a lot of points. Played hard and rugged. Just didn't fight. Got in a few fights here and there, but wouldn't fight the big boys. And I just told myself, I'm not fighting. I'm not doing it. I remember a tough guy asked me to fight one time at a opening face off. He goes, "You want to go, Robbins?" I was like, "No way, man." He goes, "Why not?" He looks me in the eye, "Why not?" And I said, "Well, because if I fight you, I'm going to have to fight all these other idiots in the league." And he just goes, "Okay, fair enough." And but
I'm sorry, describe the Elite League to me, because where is this in relation to AHL quality, NHL quality, et cetera,
yeah,
KHL quality for that matter?
I mean, it's low. I would say it's like a lot of guys in the Elite League are former AHL and ECHL players. There's a handful of NHL guys there, but then there's also local guys from the UK. I mean, I would put it probably maybe a step below the East Coast Hockey League. Um, maybe the top teams in that league could compete in the ECHL. But I would say, yeah, maybe just a hair below the East Coast Hockey League. So um, I was a player even in the East Coast Hockey League. I was a pretty good like first, second line player on, playing on the power play. And so when I went over to the Elite League, I was looked at to be one of the key players on the team. But yeah, in the grand scheme of things, I think it's, I don't even want to say it, but it's almost like, oh, the hockey's easier there, and there is some truth to that. So I was able to play hockey, and I was, going as hard as I could, but I was putting up more points than I would have in the minors in North America. But yeah, just
And
really experienced a few.
the same for the Ice League in the more Central Europe, in Austria and Hungary, Slovenia, I
So
guess, is the team you were part of.
the Austrian leagues is actually a big step up from the UK Elite League. So you got, there's a lot of ex NHL guys go to Austria. There's some, some guys are making some big time money in that league, especially for, like Salzburg, Red Bull. Red Bull sponsors the team. The coolest helmets ever. They look like silver and blue Red Bull cans. So yeah, the Austrian leagues was really good hockey. I would say, maybe somewhere between the East Coast and the AHL. Maybe some teams could compete in the AHL. But my team in Slovenia, we had an NHL guy on our team, Todd Ellick, an NHL legend, and some AHL players. But we were kind of at the bottom of the barrel in Slovenia, um, and kind of the underdog. But yeah, I mean, Austria was a big step up for sure. But yeah, after my year in Belfast, that's when I met my wife, um, this girl Samantha, who I met here in Wisconsin when I came back home, and that kind of changed things for me. Where I dialed back the partying, and and I didn't want to be an idiot off the ice, and I wanted to be faithful and really take this relationship seriously because I knew that this one was different. And now she's my wife now and the mother of my children. That's where things started to change for me, where I had this idea now there in my head that I was like, well, I want to provide for this woman and give this woman what she wants, and, a house and a family and some stability. So that's when things started percolating inside my heart, where I decided that things were going to change.
And I'm assuming that second year, then, when you're over there, now you're in Slovenia, or sorry, in the Austrian league. I'm guessing the goal now is to then work your way back to the States somehow, then, right?
Well, actually not, Tim. So at that point, my goal was to keep climbing the ranks in Europe. So I
Okay,
mean,
fair enough.
Austria's I would say is like kind of middle of the pack in Europe. But if you can get to some of the teams like, in Sweden and Finland, then you're talking like guys are making 200,000 euros there, maybe more. Then you get into the Swiss B League, the Swiss A League. Guys are making 1 million euros in that league.
Is the Continental League even on your radar, KHL?
So the KHL, yeah, I mean, guys are making that's the goal. I was like, I'm just going to keep climbing the ranks, and the KHL is the end goal for the European game for a lot of guys. And then you go to the KHL, and you can be making like some life changing money in that league. So that was really my focus. I was taking hockey seriously again, not like the year in Belfast. I took it seriously, but off the ice, kind of got out of control. Now I had my girlfriend with me and decided I'm going to keep it under control. I'm going to climb these European ranks. I'm going to make it over here in Europe. And the coach never played me. I just sat on the bench, and there was the pressure. They wanted me to be this fighter over there and this tough guy, and I just wouldn't do it. And so he just never played me, and I really didn't have much of a year at all point wise.
So then tell me what's next then. So you're your better half is with you now. You're over there, and so what is the plan then? You're getting better. You're sort of reinventing yourself and coming back into the hockey thing. You've got interest and passion in it for more reasons than just yourself. What's driving you at this point, and how does that drive take you back to the States and ultimately to Providence, where in many respects, I think you really sort of get in the fourth and even fifth gear in your career for sure.
Oh yeah, that's where I came into my stride for sure and became a legitimate pro. But after that year in Austria, I really didn't know what to do because I wasn't gonna get a contract in Austria or anything comparable to that because it's all point based and merit based, and I really didn't do anything. And so I was just going over my options, and always looming there in the back of my head was maybe I should just go back to North America and do it for real and fight for real. But I could never see myself doing that. And so I was just going, we came back home to Wisconsin, and we're just trying to figure things out. And I was making some calls to teams in Europe and teams here, just was really lost and didn't know what to do. And I had been actually chewing tobacco for a decade up until this point. I was hopelessly addicted to chewing tobacco. I would stuff 2 cans in my mouth every day. I chewed 2 cans of chew, and so I was just chewing tobacco and I was doing drugs. And one day I looked in my mouth and I had a little thing inside of my mouth, in my cheek, a growth in my cheek, and it really scared me because I'd been chewing so much, like, all day long for a decade. And so I actually had to go get a biopsy on it. My mom's a nurse at the hospital. She brought me to the doctor. They clipped a little chunk of it out and I had to get a biopsy on it. And I made a promise right there. I said, if you just, I looked up to the to the sky, and I didn't believe in God at this point, but I looked up to something up there and I said, if you just get me out of this one, I'll never chew tobacco again. And so that started this new quest for me where I was just going to quit tobacco. And I didn't care about hockey. I didn't care about anything. I just needed to quit tobacco. And it was the hardest thing that I'd ever done. I was very weak with that addiction. It had me deep as you can imagine. But somehow I was able to break free, and I quit tobacco. And then that was this moment of clarity where, man, I had been drowning myself in this nasty addiction for a decade since I was 17
Nicotine's
years old.
impossible to get off of. I mean, you
Oh,
look at that
it's
drug,
tough.
sure, but that's a drug too, right?
It was so tough. And chewing tobacco is tough because it's just going right through your lips into your bloodstream. They say it's even harder than cigarettes to quit. And just the amount I was doing, literally 2 cans, I chewed more than anybody I knew, and took a lot of pride in that, but was just being an idiot. But I was able to quit by the grace of God. I don't know how, but I was able to quit. And it was the hardest thing I ever did. And then that became my identity. I was like, I quit tobacco. I'm never doing that again. And as I had this kind of transformation, I call it the metamorphosis in the book. I got off this stuff, then I started working out, not really knowing if I was going to play hockey. I was like, I think I'm going to quit. I was just kind of smoking a lot of pot at that point.
But
Just
but but
burnt.
but do what, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
that was the
hockey's all you
thing.
knew at that point.
That
And
was the thing.
yeah.
Yeah. What do I do now? What's my identity? You know, do I go work at the cheese factory? That's where I worked my summer job, scraping mold at the cheese factory. I'm like, is this my life now? And so I was just going, I was sorting through everything. I was writing things down. I still have it. I have a notebook where I wrote 5 options. Option 1, quit hockey, get a job. Okay, here's my options: cheese factory, paper mill. What do I do? Option 2, go back to Europe, to Belfast, kind of start over. I'm a good player in that league. I can do okay in that league. Step 3, so I made 5 options. And the fifth option was fight for real and make the NHL. And so I did the pros and cons of each. And the pros for that one was like, I'll provide for my family. I'll be financially set. I'll have a car and a house, and a wife, and we can do this for real. I can have redemption. And then the cons were like, I can die doing this. I could literally die. And so I just was figuring it out, and I made the decision. I said, I'm going to do it. I'm going to fight my way to the NHL. I had a conversation with Samantha, and she was the only person who believed in me. She said, "I think you can do it, Bobby." And that's where it started. That was after my 4th year pro. I had this metamorphosis, and then called everybody, and I was already an old guy, almost 30 years old in the hockey world is pretty old. But I ended up finding a new agent who gave me a chance, and he got me a tryout in the AHL, and he got me a weekly contract in the East Coast Hockey League in beautiful Bakersfield, California, Oildale. And man, I was just grateful to have that opportunity. And so I went there. I trained all summer, trained with some boxers, and learned how to fight for real, and got in the best shape of my life, and realized that I had been poisoning myself with all these drugs and alcohol, and especially the nicotine and tobacco. Had just a constant flow into my bloodstream. It had affected my athletic performance. And so now I got healthy. I stopped drinking. I stopped drugs. I pretty much got cleaned up in every aspect of my life, cleaned up my nutrition, and became dialed in only on hockey success. Had that laser focus that I had my senior year, figured out that, that there is a correlation between laser focus and success. I think you actually need that. And so that's where it started. That's where the climb started. And just went out to Bakersfield, and I was a player, played a regular shift on the second line, but just tried to fight all the big boys and fight everybody I could. And I knew that the only way I was going to get better at fighting was just by fighting. And I just fought everyone. And I had these like virgin knuckles that they filled up, and they're puffy. And now my knuckles are like hard clubs, but it took a year of just constant punching to turn them into hands that were ready to fight. And by the time the next year rolled around, I was ready, and that's when I got the call up to Providence.
All right, but what you're describing is this. It turns on this word "fight" because in my mind it means two things, right? One is literally learning how to physically fight and make that part of your game, if not maybe even what you become known for after having literally fighting against that dynamic for so long in your career. But it's also that fight in a genuine sense, in a happier sense, in a more in a more cause-oriented kind of way, where you're fighting literally to make it to the top tier of professional hockey, right? Where you're going to fight for your career, your family, your pride, and all for the reasons why you got into this in the first place, to actually make something of yourself career-wise in this game.
Go ahead. Yeah, and it was just a fight. It was a fight within myself. I had a lot of demons and a lot of internal battles and fights, and it was really a fight for redemption, Tim. It was a redemption of my hockey career and a redemption of a broken man. And so that fight, there's many levels to it. It was fighting that fear, but it was literally going out and fighting every night. Like I was looking to fight every night. Every time I played, I was looking to get in a fight. Whenever the opportunity came, I made myself not say no. I made myself not give into the fear. And each time I overcame that, I got a little tiny victory and leveled up just a little bit. And I did have this feeling that I was fighting for something, that I was fighting for my redemption, fighting for my family, and fighting for fighting for a cause and something that was honorable. I made a comeback. I made it known that I was making a comeback. I started a blog called Minor League Fight Night that I openly declared it to the hockey world that I was fighting my way to the NHL, and talked just deep emotional writing and prose about that and what I'm experiencing going through that. And it was all, every day was just about winning that fight every single day, knowing that I was going to level up in the actual fighting game, but also metaphorically within myself, fighting against my doubts and demons. I knew that I was going to level up, and I just knew it, that I could get there if I just kept going.
Why was it so important, though, to physically fight to get yourself to the next level versus just getting better at your skills, your improved physique and nutrition and all that kind of stuff, right? Skills alone weren't enough, right?
No, and especially not at that late point in my career, not as a 29-year-old pushing 30. Pretty much a fighter and a goalie are the two positions where an old guy like that can still get an honest look. But I just knew that that's the type of player I was, because I played hard. I just played harder than anyone I ever knew. And I gave it everything I had physically. And what goes along with that, the guys who are in the NHL who play that way, they all do this. They play that way, but they are the fighters. So it's like they go hand in hand. And maybe I could have been a goal scorer, but I don't think I had that skill set in me at those highest levels. Maybe that was just my own self-limiting doubts, but the reality is it's almost like a destiny thing where at that moment before I came back to North America when I was playing in Slovenia, there was this strange shift that happened in hockey where all this stuff came out about concussions and CTE, all these like the big boy NHL enforcers, these quote unquote goons, these one-dimensional goons who weren't the greatest hockey players, let's be honest, but man, could they fight. All those guys got sent down to the minors. And this new breed of NHL came where it was all about speed. All these rules changed where obstruction rules, they would call them, and interference, where you couldn't use your body to get in front of people now and hook them with your sticks. Hockey used to be all about the neutral zone was plugged up. These big guys were hooking you with their sticks. Now the new rule is you can't even put your stick on the guy or it's a penalty. So everybody was talking that there's this new brand of the fighter that's coming out that's a fourth line checker that also fights, but not necessarily a fighter. And I was looking at myself. I'm like, I think that's who I am. That's the kind of player I am. And so all this was happening at this time, and it was just for whatever maybe fate took its course. That's what happened right at that moment where I was able to see that. Oh, okay, that opportunity has opened up for me now because that's what the new fourth line NHL winger is exactly who I am. I couldn't compete with these big guys like, Bob Probert and these guys, but man, I can compete with those guys who I'm watching on TV now who have taken over that spot, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, that awareness of what's going on in the sport, as well as your own personal awareness, that takes a lot of maturity to kind of sort of make that, and then to effect it in action, which you clearly did in Providence. So tell me about the Providence experience. I know it took a long time to get here, but Providence, I mean, it seems like lots of things came together for you, including that taste of the NHL as the oldest ever. I still think to this day rookie with Boston at the top level. Tell me about how you get there and just what's going on in Providence, because I think you're still revered for your 3+ years in Providence.
Yeah, I mean, that was my home. It just everything came together. It was one of those things. I was voted into the Providence Bruins all-time team. It's all these legends, these big time name NHL superstars. And then there's me on there, who played 3 games in the NHL. So there was something about my trajectory and my journey now where I had played that year in Bakersfield. I started again in the East Coast Hockey League in Chicago. And
Hoffman Estates, let's be specific.
yes, I'm sorry.
Center. I know. It's It's a
Hoffman Estates, Schaumburg.
Yeah, right. One of the malls, all great shopping for you. Knock yourself out.
Oh yeah, right near Cabela's there. But yeah, that was another weird thing of kind of fate coming in, and that team only existed for 1 year, and that was the year that I was there. And my coach from Elmira was the coach there, and I had this guy's a legend in the hockey world. His name's Steve Martinson, Marty. He was a fighter too, and he made the NHL late in his career in his 30s. So I told him what my plan was. I said, Marty, I'm going to fight for real. I want to be a fighter in the NHL, and I need you to let me do my thing and do everything you can to get me up to the next level. And he said, because it's a weird thing for coaches too. They want to be successful. So some coaches will, you don't want just all your good players to go up to the next level. You want to still have a successful team at the level you're at. But he agreed with me. He said, I think you can do it, Bobby. And he's the guy who told me that a fighter is the one position where age doesn't matter as much as long as you're getting the job done. And it might even be a positive thing where you're looked at as the kind of this old, tough veteran. But so I went to Chicago and I played, and I just brought it every night, fought and played good hockey. And, as fate would have it, we were playing against the Reading Royals, and I was playing out of my mind where every time I would hit somebody, they would just explode, and somebody challenged me and I fight and I was scoring goals, and I finally became like the apex of the type of hockey player that I could be just for that one game, my greatest game I ever played against the Reading Royals. And Reading was the East Coast AA affiliate of the Providence Bruins. And so must have been there scouting me, and I got called up and they said, pack your bags for a week. We're gonna bring you for the weekend games. And it's just one of those things, everything coming together. And I end up my first shift. I had an opportunity to just really crush this guy, and I smoked him and had a huge hit, and he challenged me and dropped the gloves, and I won the fight. It was like all these things clicked into place, but it was years and years and hours in the gym and just sweat and tears and blood that led up to these moments. And I think there's something about that when you go all in on something, where, maybe they're not working out. And I had a lot of setbacks, but at this moment, everything just came together. And this guy, Ryan Hallweg, he's a tough guy, a lot of respect for him, amazing player, tough fighter, but he had knocked out the Providence Bruins captain with a concussion earlier that season. And so they called me up needing some extra toughness in the lineup, and there he was, and I ended up doing really well in the fight. So everything came together, and all of a sudden a week passed, and then 2 weeks, and then they offered me a contract for the rest of the season. And it was like, I'm not worried about getting sent down now. I'm just worried about playing good hockey and winning these fights. And that was another challenge in the AHL, where these guys are big boys in the AHL. There's some real tough guys, much tougher than the East Coast Hockey League. But I just kept showing up every night and got better and better. And the town and the organization, the big bad Bruins, they're known for that hard, rugged style of hockey. Cam Neely, the president of the Bruins, he was the toughest ever. The toughest player, but also a tough fighter. And that's kind of how I saw myself too, where I could play the game, but I was going to bring it too in a fight. And so the culture of the Bruins just was perfect for who I had become as a player. And I was a little older in my years, so I was more mature, and they just saw me as a leader on the team. And I kept being a good pro every day, and took care of the young guys, and tried to be a good example. And I just kept getting contracts. And then, all of a sudden the Boston Bruins offered me a 2-year NHL contract. And that's where it became real to me that this was going to happen.
Tell me about that moment that you stepped onto the ice for the Bruins and the Boston Bruins. I'm assuming also though some preseason action too, if I'm not mistaken, prior to that.
Yep. So I played a couple preseason games. You get that taste of the NHL, but my first year of my NHL contract, I was a machine at this point. I had finally become a true professional, in the best shape of my life, the real deal hockey player, could be depended on.
Fan favorite too, on a
fan favorite, the hardest checker out there, was fighting and winning fights. So I was the real deal, and played an exhibition game and ended up hurting my knee, my second to last shift of the game, and tore some tendons in my knee. So didn't make the team that year, and everybody said, oh, this the whispers were that I was on the team, I was going to make it, but ended up spending that whole year in the AHL. Just doing my thing, kind of showed that I was a legitimate player and a legitimate fighter. And then that next season, the Boston Bruins enforcer, Sean Thornton, who's an absolute legend, I studied this guy, and he was a great mentor to me. And he just showed me what that role really meant, that you got to show up and fight and protect your teammates, but you got to play good hockey too. And so watching him and learning from him at training camp, and just some of his wisdom he gave me, it really showed me who I had to become to be that fourth line winger role. And then I saw myself become that. And by the time my second year of that contract came in, I was the fighter there, and I knew nobody was going to take my spot, but I knew I had to earn it still. But yeah, I mean, I already visualized it before it happened in my mind, getting that call that I made the team. But when they finally announced it, they announced the opening day roster, and then they released, the Young Guns rookie cards, and I was 32 years old on the Young Guns rookie card. It just really, it was surreal. It was a dream come true. It really showed me that faith and belief in something, and what you're going for is real, and that the way to achieve it is to give it everything you have every single day, and just get little steps closer to that thing that you're already envisioning in your mind. And so that's what I try to do every day, is to get a little bit better, and to see it add up over like those 3 years where I finally got up to Providence, and to put on that Boston Bruins sweater was a absolute honor. And original six team, it was pretty amazing.
And then what happened?
Well, as amazing as things were, it didn't last very long because I got a concussion early in my first game, and had concussions before, and you just play through them. At that point in my life, I wasn't going to stop for anything. You get your bell rung. What is it? A concussion? What is it? You just play through it. And, I had made the NHL. And at that point in my mind, I had said, well, I'm a fighter. I don't want to ever get pegged as a guy who has concussion problems. So I was a guy who always just played through it, and just kept getting worse and worse every single game and every day. Wasn't getting better. Ended up playing 3 games. Really didn't do anything. My play declined, and ended up getting sent down to Providence. Got sent down to the minors, and tried to play 2 more games. And at that point, I finally had to address it, that something was wrong. And man, I just had a complete mental collapse. I think it was one part the concussion, one part, just the failure of it all, one part frustration and confusion. Shortly after that, my wife had a miscarriage. So I went from the top of the world, this glorious moment, and then it very quickly, within a week or 2 or 3, it spiraled into this pit of darkness. And that's when the thoughts and the voices started coming in to just end it. And I went into a pretty dark place of suicide, suicidal thoughts, and almost actions. And I, like a dog returns to his vomit, I went back to my old ways of drug abuse, and just went into a dark place called the pit, which I call it. And I was really lost in there for a bunch of months, and barely survived it. I can't believe my marriage survived it. But so as quickly as I got to the top, it ended pretty quickly, and my hockey career was over.
How do you reframe? How do you get out of it? And clearly having a strong woman behind you, especially given what she had to go through physically, as well as your decline as well. How do you ultimately frame getting off the mat this time?
I really couldn't. I was really done. I had nothing. I was self-medicating myself, and I really, really was at the end. And my hockey career was over. I had no identity now, and pretty much my only identity was in drugs and alcohol and just numbing myself. And hockey was over, and we just decided to try and find our marriage again. And we had a little baby girl, 1 or 2 years old at this point, and we were just all holding on by a thread. And so we just went out to Colorado, and I went out there so that I could use drugs out there and smoke marijuana. And we were just on this great adventure, really, to start over. And the plan was to maybe go out there and see where destiny leads us, and find a place and just start over there, and not think about hockey anymore, not think about the darkness that we just been through, and I didn't think about fighting and concussions, and just to start over, because it ended on such a dark note. And it's in that place where I had an experience, and I found my truth, and I found that God had been waiting for me all along, and I had a great spiritual awakening and faith in God and Jesus Christ. And he saved me just on the side of a mountain. I was lost out there all alone on this mountain in Colorado, and I was on the verge of death. And I had always been seeking spiritually, and was looking into Buddhism and looking into this and that and everything, but never picked up the Bible or read it myself. But I started while I was on the road in Colorado, just plucking through the Bible, and faith comes by hearing the Word of God. And so something was happening inside of me, and I ended up going out fast. I was fasting out in a mountain in a campground, trying to get off drugs, like trying to get clean, and
Doing it by yourself, essentially?
Yeah, by myself. So I left my wife and daughter in a hotel room, and just kind of said, I need to get out of here. I need to go. I need to get off drugs. I need 3 days. And that was how I quit my tobacco addiction, was 3 days, and it's out of your system. So I had that mentality, And I went out there and I got lost out in the mountains, and I had a moment of reality where I was going to die up there. And I had just come to the realization like 2 days before about reading the Bible and the reality of what it says, and what, of heaven and of hell. And I just figured I didn't really think too deeply into any of those things before, but now having to face my own mortality, I really looked up and I was like, oh my God, am I going to go to hell right now? And I looked at my life, and I always thought I was a really good guy, and everybody said I was a good guy. But I looked at just how sick I was, and I was a really not a good guy. And that's where I called upon the name of the Lord. I just called out for God to save me. And he he saved me in a pretty miraculous way, and led me out of that mountain and led me back to my tent in a way that to this day, I can't even understand how it happened. I can only chalk it up to a miracle and God's grace. And I got back to my hotel room and I told my wife that I found what I was looking for. And that's kind of where my first part of my story ends. And then that's where my new life began. I got saved. That God saved me on the side of that mountain. And so that's where I knew hockey was over, but I said, now what is next for me? And I always knew that I was a writer. I studied writing in school. I was an English creative writing major, and I always knew I had a story in me that I was going to write a book. And so that's around the time where I started plucking down some of these sentences and really taking it as seriously as I could at that point in my life, where I would sit down and be like, all right, I'm going to write 5,000 words, and I'm not going to stop till I'm done. And I would just write and write and write. And that was really the beginnings of where this book came from. And that would probably be another 6 or 7 years before you could hold Sex, Drugs, Pucks, and Souls in your hand.
Yeah, look, and you're obviously very fortunate, right, in all of this, how this story sort of has evolved and pivoted from that seeming mountaintop to sort of probably the nadir of that, right?
Right.
How and look, I'm definitely going to bring that up. The creative writing thing is not for nothing, right? I mean, that is this book is actually very, very well written, and it's engrossing, figuratively and literally.
Yeah.
But it's truth, right? It is
Right.
it's raw. I'm sure it's not sort of sugarcoated in any way. But it's a testament, frankly, to your ability to put those into words, into a narrative, and into a story that is compelling without sort of doing it sort of garishly.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't want this to sound corny, but I truly believe that it was all part of God's plan. I truly believe that, the fact that I had this ability to write, I could write in a way that, I was studying, and I say this with all humility, not like tooting my own horn, but I was this D1 hockey player in the English department, the only hockey player in there. There was a few other athletes, some soccer players,
You
but
went to class. I mean, that's
yeah,
right.
yeah, I went to class, and I would write these things, and my professors would always read my essay to the class in like personal reflective writing, creative writing essays. And they'd be like, this is how you write an essay. And it would blow people's minds. And I was like, wow, I think I have a talent here. And then there's a famous author at our school, Andre Debus III. He wrote The House of Sand and Fog,
Oh,
New York
sure.
Times #1 bestseller. So he's on staff there, and every year one student gets selected for this directed study, a 1 year directed study with this famous author. And they approached me like, Bobby, we want you to do this study with Mr. Debus. So I was this D1 hockey player, but I'd go to class, then I would meet one on one and do these creative writing experiments with this famous author. And he'd say, well, Bobby, you have this talent that even my peers don't have. You can do something with words that they don't have. So you're gonna be a famous writer someday. And I was just like, oh, okay, whatever. I got this hockey dream I'm chasing. But so for whatever reason, I had that God-given ability to express myself in this ultra creative way that I captured in this book. And I don't know. I mean, it's an intense book. It's called A Savage Memoir, but it's my story, and I wanted to write it to impact somebody. I wrote this book to the 20-year-old version of myself sitting on a junior bus with a bunch of painkillers in my blood and a huge dip in my lip, thinking about which girl I was going to call when I got home, and I pictured somebody throwing a book on my seat and saying, "Read this." And I would have looked at this and been like, "Whoa, sex, drugs, pucks and souls, secret life of a hockey fighter," and see this bloody nose, and I'd be like, "All right, I'll read this book." But I wouldn't have read anything else, anything that would, like, if somebody threw me a Christian book or somebody threw me the Bible or Man's Search for Meaning or anything, I'd be like, this is stupid. Yeah, I'm not reading this. But my goal was to write that book to that young version, that wild man version of myself that I would have read at that point, and I would have then that book would have had a massive impact on me, an eternal impact on me, and more than just, drunken stories and good laughs, but something significant that would introduce a person to the reality of God. So that was my goal, and it ended up being like a rated R, maybe even a rated X, essentially faith journey Christian testimony, and that's what I set out to write. And I don't think it's ever been done before, and it was really scary to do. But I just knew that I had to tell this story in the way that it needed to be told. So, when I wrote that story about junior hockey, I I put my mind as the narrator, as that 19-year-old narrator writing without any filter of like what I think is appropriate now as a man as a man of faith and as a dad. I just said, I'm going to write it how he would say it. And so there's some hard stuff in here for sure. And it's been a challenge releasing this in a lot of ways, especially with those closest and family and things like that. And I truly believe that, if one person is impacted in a massive way by this book, that it's worth it for me.
But it's also a triumph in the fact that you're able to it's real, and I think that gets across to a whole slew of readers, whether they be hockey fans or interested in your story, just in general, sort of tangential manner. But frankly, just other people who frankly need it or could be strongly benefited from understanding your story because perhaps they see themselves in some of the stuff that you're going through. And frankly, sometimes that reality is really what needs to come across for people to understand it and then recognize that they too need to go to another level and figure out stuff to save themselves, if you will.
Yeah, that's right. And that's been the feedback, is so many people have been saying, wow, I really saw myself in this scene, or that hit so close to home. I just talked to a media guy who was, in tears with me. He's like, man, I couldn't even get through it. I couldn't even get through the first three because it hit too close to home. He's like, I needed to take a break. And, so people are being affected by it in a way that I think, because it's so real and so raw and visceral and in your face. I know for me, as a consumer of media or a reader of books, like, that's what I want. I always wanted the wild stuff, the madman stuff, and I wanted the raw and the real and warts and all, and that's what I was always interested in. And so I just decided that I was going to write it. And this book, it took a lot of forms. It was going to be like the motivational book, and then it was going to be like the quote unquote Christian book, and I had a lot of ideas, but finally I just said this book needs to take its own voice, as each chapter in that man's life, as I'm looking back, that I'm going to let that kid speak. I'm going to let that college young man speak. I'm going to let that early pro guy speak, and to not filter it in any way. I think that's why people have resonated with it, because people can recognize real, and people can recognize when you're holding back or candy coating something. And I'm not the hero of this story for sure, but I think a lot of people can see themselves in the experiences that I've gone through. And I just had a guy reach out to me a couple weeks ago and said, "Hey, your book, it blew my mind. Thank you so much." So many people have been saying, "Thank you for writing it. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for writing it." And he said, "Man, you inspired me to quit chewing tobacco." I was like, "That's it. That's it for me. I'm willing to." For anything that's embarrassing or too real or too nasty in this book about my experience, it's worth it. That if some guy can finally break free from that prison, that I know what that prison feels like of addiction. And if somebody can break free from it and feel the freedom that I felt, it's worth it to me. So that was some of my mentalities going into writing this thing.
All right, let's. I'm Couple of last questions, and then I'll let you promote because you've been more than generous with your time. And the one thing I would say is that vulnerable. That's the word that comes to my head, right? Is that I mean, you
Yeah.
really put yourself out there, right? So, but with that vulnerability, not only comes a great, I mean, objectively great and well written story, right? So that's to your skill. But it also puts you in some perhaps compromising positions because you got to live with this now because everybody knows about this stuff now.
Right.
How are you adjusting to that? And are you comfortable with that? And does that worry you that not only you're going to backslide someday, but I mean, just that you have to still deal with the fact that now more people than ever know some of these demons that you went through?
Yeah, I mean, the honest answer to that, Tim, is I don't think I could have written this book without my faith in God, because I would have cared way too much what people thought about me. I would have cared way too much. And I held that anxiety. I had that weird anxiety for much of my life about caring what people think about me. But now in my relationship with God, I'm not going to say I never feel little anxieties or insecurities, but I'm secure in my identity of who God says that I am. And that's for me, that's only through Jesus Christ, who he says that I am. He says I'm forgiven. He says I'm washed clean. He says I'm his child. So there's really no way I could have said the things that I said in there unless I had that faith and knowing that my book would ultimately show the glory of God, that he could redeem a man like that. So, I mean, I realize I have to live with it now, and I think there is a responsibility, and I'm just gonna try my best to be a voice where when conversations come up, I love having spiritual conversations, and it seems like they come up in this a lot. And for me, much of my life, I was spiritually lost and spiritually dead, and I would have needed as a 20-year-old some kind of conversation if I'm just, I'm a young man lost in sex and porn and drugs and all this, where I think that this is great and this is life. I didn't even know that that was bad. I didn't even know that God had a different plan for me. So for a young man to read this and to see that reality in such a raw way, I'm hoping that reality then can become that person's reality. But yeah, like I said, there's some stuff in here. I aired out all my skeletons, and and I'm okay with that. I'm going to live with that, and I have children now, and so it's going to be a challenge to raise. I have two boys and a girl, and there's who's their daddy. Everyone wants to know like what their dad was like as a young man, and I just I'm going to put my faith in God. That's the only way I can do this and live this out now, and ultimately, I I without being corny, I really am this way. I really feel this way. I just say, this is your story, God. You can do whatever you want with it, and you can use me however you want to use me. And so I can't think of a better way to live my life, and that's just how I'm living it.
No, and again, I think that's going to be inspirational for a lot of people, perhaps maybe unbeknownst to them, that perhaps, hey, I'm not alone. This
Right.
does sound similar. Maybe I'm not the only one going through this particular thing, or holy cow, that's me in a different shell here. What, perhaps there's opportunity and salvation, if you will, and or just a changing of paths for me because of other people. And arguably, this is a testament, right? This is your testimony in some
Right.
respects.
Yeah, and that's what I want. I want a young man to read this and to say, "Wow, I'm not alone." If there is somebody who's struggling with addiction or struggling with their sexual identity or struggling with, pornography, we're all struggling with something. Like nobody has it all figured out on the inside. I would hate to see,
It's all the human condition, you know?
right. I would hate to see some kid, who's lost in something take his own life, like I almost did. But hopefully they would see this and say, "Oh, I'm not alone." And I've had that. Many people have said, "Whoa, I was like that too." I just see myself in that, especially with the sexual stuff, for young men. It's I think it's definitely a problem, and I just know I know another way now, and if I could ever lead one kid away from that and out of that, and then that would make it all worth it to me. Even if I got to feel a little embarrassed when I walk into the post office or the grocery store to be like, "Oh, does that person know what I used to do?" Like, it's worth it for me, um, and and I wouldn't have it any other way. I wanted to write something real and raw. That's how I've always been. I didn't want to write something candy coated. I had a guy mentor once tell me, he said, Bobby, don't waste this book. Don't waste it because this can impact people. And so people have read it and they hate it. They don't like it. They're like, that's too disgusting. But a lot of people have read it and say, I really resonated with that. And I appreciate your honesty, because I think when you experience something so honest like that, it's almost like a mirror. It shows a glimpse into your own humanity and the reality of what you are and the things that you do when nobody's looking. And so I was just I can't say that all the courage came from me to expose that stuff, but all glory to God that He gave me the strength to do that.
All right. So here's the last question then. What comes from this and going forward, right? I mean, has it all, in addition to the story and other people identifying with it and hopefully speaking message to others who could benefit from it, has it unlocked your creative juices to become a writer, maybe full time, or what is your career path? What's in store for you in the years ahead now that this is theoretically out of your system? Has this unlocked maybe a writing career for you, for example?
Yeah, for sure. I think, one part of this was releasing it into the world, and now I'm having to work on kind of the business side of things and the entrepreneurial sales side of things. And the creative writing comes easy to me, but I'm learning a lot of this other stuff too now, and networking and
promotion with long-winded podcast interviewers and all that stuff, right?
Oh, if there's one thing that I can be, it's long-winded. So this is we're just hitting the tip of the iceberg here.
I was casting aspersion at me, not you. But.
Oh, both of us. I think we're doing pretty good. I love long-form conversations, but yeah, I mean, I want to take this. I want to see how far this book can go. I want to, obviously, I want to be massively successful financially from this. I want to provide for my family forever, my kids. I want this to be huge, but I also want to take it to other media. I know a lot of people don't read books anymore. So I want to make this into a movie. I want to make this into a documentary. I want to make this into like a Netflix 12-part miniseries, one each hour for each chapter. So I have a lot of ideas, and I'm reaching out to some people right now, and things are just kind of taking form, and I'm just putting out the feelers and saying, all right, whatever opens up, if a door opens, it opens. If it closes, it closes. And just kind of letting God lead the way on it. So that's, now that the book's out, there's kind of that element of it of taking it to the next level. But yeah, I think I owe it to myself, and I think I owe it to the world, to write more. So I've made a commitment of how many books I want to write, and I have some stories that are percolating right now. And I have this talent, so I'm like, all right, I'm gonna explore it, and I think that'd be the most amazing thing, just to be a full-time writer now. And I haven't started number 2 yet, the second one, but I do have, it's starting to form. I feel it like I felt 7 years ago when this thing was forming. I'm feeling that now. And now I don't think it's going to take 7 years, because after I've done this first one, now I kind of I know the process of it. But yeah, I want to explore my creativity, and I want to write stuff that matters. I want to write something that's going to make an impact, far longer, beyond than when I'm here on this earth. So that's my mission now, is getting this book and this story out, making as big of impact as possible. And then, I'd love to put out 1 million words. Would be a goal of mine throughout my lifetime, to create a body of work of 1 million words, which is about 10 books. Most of my books are going to be about 100,000 words. This one was 118,000. But that's kind of a goal that I've seen now is, man, how cool would it be to put out a body of work of 1 million words, 10 books, and what's next? What's after sex, drugs, pucks, and souls? I don't know. It's going to be something wild, though. I can promise you that.
Well, literarily, this is a hell of a story, and it's a hell of a way to kind of debut yourself into the writing world. And I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. We have many conversations about very interesting stories that arguably should be on higher levels or delivered in other forms of media and stuff. And I think absolutely this is. I can't wish you more luck than I can for furtherance of this story. And I think many people will be intrigued. If they can't read, God forbid, they could see it on the screen somewhere or in some other form or fashion. Well, God forbid, we'll help you sell a few extra copies of the book to maybe get in the hands of the right people, huh? Knock on wood.
Yeah. I love that. I've had people say, give it to somebody and they're just like, oh, okay. I wonder if they even read it or not. But I've had other people grab it and are like, man, this is something. This is the best thing I've ever read, And there was a review that was just written. It said, I bought this book to support somebody from my hometown, and what I got was the best nonfiction book I've ever read. And to hear something like that, I'm just I'm grateful. Number one, totally blessed and grateful, but I'm just waiting for that right person. I don't know who, maybe some producer or an agent or somebody to grab this thing and read it and have that same response and to be like, okay, we can do something massive with this. And I think it's going to happen. And if not, then I truly put it all up to God's will, and I'm going to do my very best to bring this thing and make it go nuclear. I want this thing to explode. But at the end of the day, it's my story. I put it out there, and whatever is going to happen is going to happen. And I can't wait till it gets in that right hand. It's in some hands. I'll give a little clue. It's in some hands right now that could make a huge difference. So I'm just praying that somebody recognizes it for what it is, that it, the diamond or the unicorn that it is. I hope they can recognize it, and we'll see what happens.
Well, I told you that was going to be some conversation, and I believe we delivered and then some. Our thanks to Bobby for a very honest and actually quite wonderful throughout all of it conversation. What a memory, and hard to believe he can remember all those things given all the, shall we call them distractions? Sure. During that intriguing minor league and cup of coffee major NHL career of his. And it is a great story to see him come through the other side and have newfound appeal for not only himself and his family, but lust for life, shall we say, going forward outside of the craziness of the professional hockey game. The book, again, is if you can't not intrigued enough by this conversation, I don't know what you were listening to, but you should get this book. And the fact that he wrote it himself without any editorial help is quite amazing. He spent quite a lot of time listening and learning back at the old UMass Lowell days in his creative writing classes. It is called Sex, Drugs, Pucks, and Souls, a Savage Memoir, the Secret Life of a Hockey Fighter. And it's hard to put down. It is that good. And we will not be surprised if this turns into something more than just a book, perhaps a documentary, perhaps a feature film of some sort. We can already speculate as to who could play Bobby in this film, etc. But I assure you that you will enjoy this book. And as the 5-star ratings across the board on Amazon already prove the case, not one below that 5.0 rating. I think that speaks volumes as well. Of course, you can find it wherever good books are found, in either hardcover or paperback version. It is published by Rotterdam Books. And of course, you can go to our website if you'd like at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just search up this episode number 356 with Bobby, and you will find a convenient link to our friends at Amazon. We'll get a couple of shekels of referral love. Not much more than that, I assure you. But it's probably the easiest and fastest way to get this book into your grubby little hands. While you're online, why don't you also check out Bobby's website? It is Bobby Robbins 1B. So Bobby with 2 B's, Robbins with 1 B. So that's Bobby Robbins, ROBINS.com, BobbyRobbins.com. All kinds of background stuff about this book and his story. You can also follow him on the Twitter X thing at Bobby Robbins Pro. It's all one word. Again, Bobby is Bobby. Robbins is ROBINS, and the word pro. Bobby Robbins Pro at before that, of course. And let's see, depending on when you're listening to this, if you happen to be up in the wilds of Wisconsin, and it's a beautiful time to go up there and drive around and enjoy the late summer, early fall foliage and things leading up to such. If you happen to be in the Fond du Lac Wisconsin area on September the 7th, well, why don't you stop by Fondue Fest, where you can meet and greet Bobby Robbins, get your copy of your book signed by him right there. You can have a conversation. Tell him you heard about him and his story in the book on this here little podcast. And he'll be at the Mike's Memorabilia Store table doing all that kind of stuff. Again, that's September 7th in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin at Fondue Fest. Check it out. And again, if you happen to mention that you heard about it on this show, hey, take a picture and send it to us. So we'd love to publicize that and know that we helped make a couple of new friends and sell a couple of books. We always appreciate that. Let's see, social. You can find us on the Twitter X thing as well. We're at Good Seats Still. You'll find us on Instagram and Threads and Facebook and on YouTube. The handle there in those places is at Good Seats Still Available. If you'd like to send us an email, please by all means do so. We're at hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. And while you're on our website, when you're on our website, go to our merch section. We've got a lot of great partners there for some awesome merch from various teams and leagues and situations that you may just have forgotten about and might like to buy a pin or a mug or some shirts or whatever, a jersey from some of those folks. So we appreciate you checking those out too. Our appreciation extends, of course, as always this week, to our pal Jerry Payne down in metropolitan Atlanta, Georgia. Jerry Payne, Audio Excellence. Thank you, kind sir, as always, for your knob-twiddling prowess. And thanks again to all of our great listeners. Lots more coming up as the page turns and we go into the fall. Thank you, of course, as always, for listening. And until next week, take care of yourselves and be well.